Queen Matilda of Flanders, overshadowed by her more famous granddaughter of the same name, was atypical for a woman of her time. She had immense sway, refusing to be cowed by her often violent Norman husband. She was more than just the wife of the Conqueror. She was one of the most influential and powerful women in Europe. And this is her story. Time, and thus age, is inescapable. It doesn't matter if you're a lowly villain ploughing the Lord's fields, a bishop, or even a king or queen. Old Father Time watches over us all, and Queen Matilda of Flanders is no exception. When we first met her, she was a headstrong young damsel, and one of the most beautiful women in Europe. People sang songs about her. People wanted to be her. But all that was a lifetime away. It's now the mid-1070s, and Matilda is in her mid to late 40s. Now, I'm not saying this is old by any standards. Far from it. People in the Middle Ages aged just like you and I, just without modern methods. The average lifespan was around 50, due to incurable diseases that we've long eliminated. For instance, a woman gives birth, has postnatal complications like a hemorrhage. That's fatal. Just look at Jane Seymour, Queen to Henry VIII. Poor Jane died just before she was 30 after giving birth. Breast cancer? Heck, any kind of cancer. Diabetes. Even something as simple as a common cold could kill if you had a problem with your immune system, though most likely you wouldn't have made it through childhood. Plus any other dangers. You could look at it as like a survival of the fittest. Getting to your 50s was good going. Getting to your 70s was venerable. She's given birth to many children, though thankfully those years are behind her. It's most likely taken its toll on her figure, on her looks, but we don't know exactly what she looked like during this period, or even before. Maybe she's gifted enough to keep her looks and figure. You never know. There are plenty of women who make Father Time work harder for a living, and are keeping youthful right until their later years. Just look at Dame Joan Collins. Here she is in the year 2025. She's 91 years of age. Or the news presenter, Bev Turner. She's my age. 51. If you could believe it, she looks 10 years younger. I'm not telling her to attend the knitter-natter at the local church, or the local bingo. She'd kill me. Matilda, though, would have loved a good knitter-natter, being an accomplished seamstress and deeply religious. She would have been at home here. What we can hedge our bets on, though, is that Matilda herself can see every wrinkle, every extra inch. She's probably a couple of dress sizes up. She could look stunning to anyone who looked upon her. She just won't personally see it. And this is the later part of the 11th century, so she's not about to get a Botox or a boob job. And William the Conqueror is no spring chicken either. He's also piling on the pounds, knocking 50, and firmly dedicated to a rich meat-heavy diet and a copious amount of wine. Given that he must have had less exercise, he probably needed plus-size armour. But as far as he's concerned, he's earned every bit of it. So, given that they are no longer star-struck lovers and they're getting on a bit, well, for the 11th century, you can imagine what the gossip is like. There are rumours that her husband is seeing other women, which was normal for the time, just unusual for William. Most likely these are just rumours spread by their enemies, the like we've come across time and time again. Some of the more fanciful stories, like the Conqueror going wenching and having an illegitimate daughter, were the inventions of an 18th century Frenchman, Abbé Prévost. One of his more famous stories has William finding husbands for two young women, and Matilda getting jealous and sending an armed guard to get them. After the Conqueror kills the guards, he then has the girls married. When the girls die a year later, he blames Matilda and has her dragged through Caen on the back of a horse. We've heard stories like this before. Thankfully, Prévost was writing in the 1700s, and Matilda never got to hear the rubbish he was writing about several hundred years later. I doubt she would have been amused. She would have hung him by the postern. No, a postern's a back entrance. Oh, heaven's sake. Anyway. Other rumours would have been more closer to home and her time. When a noblewoman, the wife of Hugh Rominil, accused King William of seducing her, this rumour ends up going pretty viral for the era, and it soon passed through to the mother of the late Harold Godwinson.
Someone's been telling porkies.
A right load of cobblers. And she added her own bits. She's now got King Willie swiving his way through Canterbury Cathedral, impregnating the daughter of one of the canons. And Matilda has to send the seductive minx packing, but not before having her crippled. It gets absurd. And then the rumour gets to the King of Denmark, most likely Svein Estridsson, though in 1076 he's passed away and Harold the Soft takes the throne. And the Danes add their own bits to the tale, and you can only imagine what they're coming up with. Well, at least the clergy aren't getting involved. When the chronicler Malmesbury, oh bugger, spoke too soon, writes his 12th century works, he even adds a few of these most unlikely rumours into his tales, enabling them to persist throughout history. In his defence, he doesn't say they are true. He does state that he believes they are false and actually berates the people who started the rumours in the first place. He calls it lunacy. But like I say, he's pretty much enabling them to persist. And by the 13th century, other writers have added their own bits. And now, of course, William is beating Matilda so hard he kills her. Well, not that Matilda got the memo, because she was very much alive and well in this period of time. Well, not 13th century, but the 11th. And as for her relationship with her husband, she's the perfect stateswoman and the perfect wife. The two adored each other. The only thing that does crop up repeatedly is her ruthlessness. This isn't the first time she's been accused of really vengeful acts. Do we argue no smoke without fire, like with the Saxon lord Bithric, who jilted her all those decades ago, then died? Has all the power simply gotten to her head? Is there any truth to any of these rumours? It's certainly food for thought. I mean, she's a very powerful woman with an incredible amount of influence. Who knows what she's up to behind the scenes? And Matilda wasn't the only victim of the rumour mill. So let's go on quite a tangent here and deal with her eldest son, Robert Curthose. Because last time we met him, he was about to do something rather rash. Although Firstly, I will say that he wouldn't like you calling him Curthose. Hose are stockings. A Curthose are short hose. Short hose, short boot. It's the opposite of Longshanks. It's basically call him a short ass. It's pretty much an insult, and one his father uses. His title is Robert of Normandy. As far back as 1072, he's already been prepped for the Duke of Normandy. His father, King William, was even allowing him to use the title Count. He was even recognised as heir apparent. Despite Robert's arrogant streak and the growing gulf between father and son, he is bestowed this. However, for Robert of Normandy, titles meant nothing, and they were powerless words. Robert longed for power. He already had a minier of rebellious sycophants, made up of the sons of the higher nobility. Yet this rich boys' club is seen by William as nothing but a vanity project. But by now, Robert was no longer a child. He was a man who lived a life of excess, less focused on the chivalry and etiquette he was expected to display, instead preferring debauchery and sin, at least in the eyes of his critics. It was as if Robert was rebelling against his father's lacklustre affection. Right, now, this might be part of a vicious rumour mill, one we're familiar with, but Robert's courts say he had as many jesters and fools as they did prostitutes of both sexes. Yes, his haters were accusing him of being on the other bus, so to speak, homosexual.
Well, he's getting a bit bold, isn't he? Getting a bit bald as well.
Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, especially in our day and age, and a bit of hanky-panky with your best chum has been going on for centuries, millennia even. But still, it's a very different day and age, and in the 11th century, they had completely different views. No one was waving a rainbow flag in the day and age of Matilda. Far from it. Marriage, I hear you say. Marriage! The man was married, I tell you. Yes, marriage. And even Edward II was married. Even Kenny Everett was married. The good old Lavender. Well, but like I say, it's a different day and age. People did things differently there. And for all we know, there was no basis for the rumour whatsoever. I just can't dismiss one rumour and blindly accept another. I'm just presenting things how they were. But we only have the words of the haters, so we need to take a pinch of salt with this. Robert may have just simply been young and doing new things that his parents disapproved of. We've all been there. But one of his critics was the chronicler Orderic Vitalis, a source we've been relying on. He's very credible. It's sure he's writing this a couple of decades later, but he's pretty much contemporary to the time. Currently, he's just a little boy destined for the church, but one day he'll become one of our most valuable sources. Vitalis slams Count Robert as being effeminate, dressing effeminately. His whole court was dressed effeminately. He pretty much backs up the crux of the rumours. Now, unlike the Conqueror and his Norman elite, who wore their short hair akin to Cromwell's new model army, Robert's minier had new methods. They had longer hair, flouncy clothes, very foppish for the era, but regular for, say, King John, who you see here. All of these rumours would also be pointed at Robert's brother, William Rufus. Actually, not only does he get it worse, but there's more evidence to back it up. For a start, Rufus never had any mistresses, nor does he ever marry, preferring to be the everlasting bachelor. He's also a foppish dandy with long hair and swagger, just like his brother. Though take in mind, when they say long hair, don't imagine a 1960s hippie straight from Woodstock. But we were comparing it to the Norman cut, a bit like in 1950s, Jerry Lee Lewis was accused of having long hair, because it was longer than the classic short back and sides. He was apparently accused of being pig ignorant and rude, with a pot belly and short legs. Robert of Normandy, that is, not Jerry Lee Lewis. But Jumièges had described Robert as dashing and handsome, and Robert was certainly fighting fit, a very accomplished soldier in his prime, unlike his father who was getting on a bit and putting on a few pounds. So we can definitely agree that Robert was certainly victim to the rumour mill, but they may have had a basis in truth. We don't know. These days, it's always the eldest child of the king or queen who becomes the monarch. Wasn't always the case. Meet Robert of Normandy. Now he is William the Conqueror's eldest son. Due to quarrels with the family, he never became king. So do take that in mind. Anyway, William certainly disapproved of his son's antics, saw Robert as arrogant beyond compare. He made sure Robert saw no power in Normandy, hence we see Matilda's power as regent increasing, and by 1077 things were turning sour. Robert's attitude had also turned to open hostility. He feels like he's a mere soldier rather than the heir apparent he was supposed to be. Also take in mind that Robert's other two brothers, William Rufus and Henry, were adored by their father. Henry the youngest was 9 by now. On the flip side, Matilda absolutely adored Robert, so it's not like he lived in a loveless household. With his father away, he would have spent a great deal with his mother. On a side note, in 1077, Matilda and William were actually dedicating 3 cathedrals, including the one that began construction around the time of their marriage, St. Etienne. And the ceremony was filled, as usual, with pride, pomp and circumstance. Because, as we all know, the pomp and circumstance was a great Norman tradition. We're already aware of the lavishness of their crowning events. Everything the Normans did was over the top and grand. The consecration of Bishop Odo's Cathedral in Bayeux was even more grandiose. The bishop himself loved splendour just as much as the next Norman, and loved to splash the cash. Anyway, continuing with Robert in 1077, the relationship between himself and his father, King William, deteriorates further. William especially was set in his ways. He absolutely could not see the resentment in his son, who that year sought an audience with his father. He wished to rule as Duke of Normandy, plus all the powers that came with it. But instead of granting the wish, William explodes into rage, denying his son everything. So, Robert storms out of the chamber and planned to take Normandy by force. But instead of taking it seriously, William seems to take it in his stride, pretty much escalating the situation. The relationship between father and son is almost dead by this point. So imagine the scene that happens later. Matilda is with her husband at L'Aigle in Normandy. William is gathering troops for a quarrel with the lords of Corbenay. Also in L'Aigle is Robert of Normandy, who is staying nearby with Roger Chatois and Gunther, two of his friends. It's as if that little tiff prior had died down a bit, and this is as well as it's going to be. Well, Matilda's other two sons, William Rufus and Henry, are already noticing the obvious favouritism towards their older brother. They are already siding with their father over this family squabble, and are about to prove to be spiteful little buggers indeed. Right. These two little buggers, Rufus and Henry, decide to visit Robert. Rufus is now 20, by the way, and Henry is around 9. They reach the manor, and are then accompanied by the rapacious fops that make up Robert of Normandy's Meunier. All is well, but Robert himself is too busy to see his brothers, who head up to the top of the solar. Right, now Rufus and Henry end up playing dice. They have a few drinks, and remember there's no age limit to drinking in this day and age. The two scallywags end up tossing a full bedpan to the floor below to goad their brother into a fight, and apparently the bedpan actually lands on Robert's head. Robert blows his top, and influenced by his men, who promptly remind him that these two scallywags are in the upper solar, thus they consider themselves superior to him, and outraged to Robert's arrogance and pride, mischief managed. A massive argument erupts between the three brothers, only de-escalating when King William arrives to sort it all out. But by the next night, Robert of Normandy and his men are gone, having deserted William's campaign. Instead of fighting for his father, he fights against his father, heading to the capital and laying Rouen Castle to a league, a siege. War was opened. It was also treason. There was no other way of looking at it. There would be no going back from this. In the defence of the castle was Roger of Ivory, an accomplished soldier, and the siege is short, going in favour of the defenders. So, with Robert of Normandy's siege being unsuccessful, the now rebels flee Normandy in fear of the Conqueror's retribution. The flight took him to Flanders, where he joined with his uncle, another Robert, the Count of Flanders. And Robert of Flanders is more than willing to be an ally of this rebel faction. The Count has already proven a thorn in King William's side by crushing his forces at the Battle of Cassel, where William Fitz-Osbern was killed. From Flanders, news spreads of this open rebellion. It is soon mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. They mention it as a rebellion caused by a father refusing to give his son any power. Robert of Normandy does also try to gain sympathy from elsewhere. He's trying to get big names like Bishop Odo, who is slightly sympathetic, and other rulers in Europe, but he gets nowhere, and any finances raised are quickly squandered by his lavish lifestyle. He even approaches Philip, King of France. But William dismisses this act of aggression as folly, sparked by a foppish fool. It's a rebellion that will go nowhere, it's merely a family squabble. Right, tangent over, and it was a long one, I do apologise for that. Let's return back to Matilda, because she's caught up in the middle of all of this. Unlike her husband, Matilda still loved her son. She's already lost Richard to a riding accident, and now her eldest is in exile. She also knew just how terrible the Conqueror's wrath would be should he face and crush Robert's forces. Losing another son would be unbearable. So it makes perfect sense that she wasn't going to break that maternal bond, and she kept in contact with her son during his exile. Behind her husband's back, of course, sending Robert a series of secret letters. In case you're wondering what medieval ceilings look like in these places, just look up. There it is. It's intact. All kinds of self-blame were rushing through Matilda's mind. Could she have done this? Could she have done that? How did son and father become so estranged? Well, actually, she knew all too well. William was a brute. He loved control. He had pushed his son away. If Matilda hadn't been a headstrong, ambitious stateswoman, maybe she would have fared worse herself against her husband's explosive outbursts. Robert had certainly inherited his mother's determination. She was in her native homeland in Flanders with her younger brother, the Count. And letters are travelling back and forth between Matilda and Robert, Normandy. She knows exactly what his movements are. She knows he plans his inevitable invasion into Normandy. And there is no evidence that she is trying to talk him out of this folly. Oh, far from it. Matilda actually funds her son. She's enabling this. She sends him money, knowing full well it can be used to raise an army against her husband William, all behind the Conqueror's back. Most likely her own private funds from her own estates, making the money very hard to trace. Her love for her son, it seems, is far stronger than the love for her overbearing husband. If you were an 11th century conspiracy theorist, you'd be forgiven to come to the conclusion that Matilda is funding her son's invasion so they can both wrest the Duchy of Normandy from William, ruling as mother and son. They would certainly be forgiven for coming to such conclusions, as a clear motive for this would have no doubt have been Matilda's own power and ambitions, because ever since the invasion of England, Matilda and Robert had enjoyed considerable power in Normandy. They ran every aspect of it, eventually all the power being granted to Matilda alone. But once William had restored stability to England, he's ruling from Normandy. He's spending increasing amounts of time in Normandy, stripping Matilda from her regency control. Only one man was going to enjoy power under William, and that was William. And this is in a day and age before Magna Carta. The Conqueror ruled with absolute power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And he was now set to lose both his son and his wife. If William ever found out of Matilda's treachery, his fury would know no bounds. Or at least so you would have thought, given by his previous exploits. Because when the Conqueror did find out, it was inevitable. He has an extensive spy network. He appears to be passionate, but calm. Uncharacteristically calm. He simply tells her to cease and not to do it again. Despite having committed treason that would have seen others maimed and slain, he's basically let her off the hook. Does she obey? Does she bunnies? She gets straight back to funding her son's rebellion. Now we see the true fury of William, as he is beside himself with rage. We all know just how brutal the king can be. He's already beaten her bloody for turning down his hand in marriage. And assuming you take the rumour mill with even a grain of salt, you absolutely get the impression that arguments between William and Matilda were resolved with fists. This time the whole court was to witness what would usually only happen in the solar in front of silent serfs. In a blind rage, he turns on his wife in front of the magnates and clergy. A faithless wife brings ruin to the state, the Conqueror rages, as Matilda cowers on her knees, begging forgiveness, fearing what was coming next. He's shouting, explaining her betrayal, explaining her crimes against the state. He's about to explode. Then, Matilda regains her composure and gives a speech that moved the court. And remember, she knows what's coming. She's going for broke. She simply tells the court that it is no wonder she loves her son with every piece of affection. She tells everyone that by the power of God, the Most High, if her son was dead, and she had to sacrifice her own life to bring him back, she'd take it in a heartbeat. Weak woman that I am. Her words, not mine. She goes on to say that there is no way she can enjoy wealth knowing her son is living in poverty. She'll never ever be guilty of being such hardness of heart, and for all the king's power, he has no right to demand her of this. No, I'm paraphrasing. The exact words she used, delivered in her defiance to her husband in the court, are only written by one account, and she'd be using French not English. Even so, it gives a good insight to the character of Matilda, defiant to the last. And she might have just flipped the argument against William, for in her desperation, she'd proven that all she was doing was a duty as the loyal mother. And in the 11th century, this was the most honourable duty a woman can do. But the king is too blinded with rage to see any reason. He orders one of the Queen's chief messengers, and no doubt the one delivering the money, to be arrested and blinded. Yeah, but Matilda's already predicted this. And the man is forewarned. He's already fled to a monastery. There, Samson, as that was his name, takes up the life of a monk. The one place he is immune to the wrath of the deeply religious king. And this is the monastery of the Abbey of Saint-Evroux, which is run by Abbot Maine. Another person at this time was the Chronicle of Vitalis, and this is how we learn of the messenger's flight. Sure, Vitalis was only a small child around this time, but he would have known Samson very well as the years progressed. But as for Matilda, she seems shell-shocked by this whole affair. We find no evidence of any support for Robert of Normandy after this. We can trace no funds. It all stops abruptly. And the king would never let her act as sole regent again. Instead, she would act as co-regent with the support of her two sons, Rufus and Henry. Where once she was the most powerful woman in Europe, she was now merely the wife consort to the king. Though if William thought for a second that Matilda was suddenly going to return to being the loyal wife, he had another thing coming. Now they are more estranged than ever, growing further and further apart with each coming year. And all this stress seems to have affected Matilda's health. Having fallen from grace so dramatically in such a short time, and then cowered into submission by a ruthless bully. She's even seeking remedies for lethargy, as if her very will was snapped away. And this is Matilda we're talking about, once wealthy and powerful, on top of the world, now broken, a nervous wreck. And it's not like the remedies would work either, because we know Matilda was superstitious. So by remedy, we're talking about getting a holy man, a miracle worker, to bless her bread. Well, okay, actually, this holy man might need an introduction. He is the abbot of Les Chaise Dieu. He's Alain le Beaujou, a Spanish knight who had long since put down his sword, having completed a pilgrimage to Rome. He is famous throughout Europe through his exploits as performing the miracle of healing the sick. And Matilda had sent messengers to the abbey at Chaise Dieu in hope to clear her lethargy. This is where she gives him the request to bless her bread, which after declining, well, she's the queen, he decides to grant her wish. The bread is blessed. It is sent to Matilda. Apparently, as the chronicles go, it worked. Matilda was then cured of her ailment. Lethargy gone. She's back. Okay, I'm not one to naysay the saints, but skeptics will no doubt scoff at this miracle cure. But I will remind them that Matilda's character isn't a kept woman. She's not coward. She's not weak nor feeble. Maybe blessing bread from a saint was all she needed. This was enough faith to get her back on her feet and back to her usual self. Sometimes that's all people need. She offered to pay him £100, a substantial amount of money. But Alain refused her offer. Instead, the Queen donated it to the abbey itself to fund the monks' dormitory, which was much to his liking. Let's return back to the rebellious Robert of Normandy, as things were really kicking off in 1078. Despite her husband's efforts, Matilda's funds must have worked, as her son has managed to recruit a sizable army. He even manages to secure a base of operations, Château Rimla, a territory only 20 miles from L'Aigle, which was a castle that belonged to Hugh Chateauneuf, a relation to none other than Matilda's friend Mabel of Boleyn. Right. Robert's rebels are now poised to make lightning raids into Normandy. The civil war was looming. This prompts King William to act. His own folly realised. Rotrou, the Count of Perche, is the magnate in charge of Rimla, and he allows his king to move his forces into the territory, building 4 forts only a stone's throw away from Chateau Rimla. And, sure, Hugh Chateauneuf might be a relation to Mabel, but Mabel is the wife of Roger Montgomery, William's right-hand man. Naturally, they support their king. A king who strips all knights loyal to Robert of their lands, using the confiscated money to hire mercenaries. However, King Philip of France now also joins the conflict, on the side of Robert of Normandy, and the French king was no fan of William, but did like Matilda, as they were both related. Matilda and Philippe shared the same grandfather, King Robert of France. Unlike the people of William's generation, who greatly feared him, and his reputation often preceded him, the younger Philip had no such stipulation. In fact, the French king was a rising star in popularity, and he was looking for any excuse to put the aging conqueror back in his place. Recently, when the conqueror tried to annex Brittany, King Philippe had moved his own forces to Dole.
And in 1076, he utterly defeated the Conqueror, routing his army and lifting the siege, the Conqueror's first defeat. Plus Philippe had already been looking for any excuse to get his hands on the Vexin, a vital area of tactical importance linking France with Normandy. And now the French have allied with Robert. So fine, William can deny Robert Chateau Rimelard. He'll simply bestow him another fortress, a Chateau Giberois, a formidable fortress that swings the scale of balance. And from Giberois, Robert of Normandy makes the first roll of the dice, and war begins with a series of brutal raids along the Norman border. And by now, even some of his father's supporters have sided with the rebels. Robert was very much like his father, everything that William feared. Tactics familiar to the Conqueror were now played against him. Towns burned, farms razed. Everywhere there was wanton slaughter. Yeah, Robert had got his father's full attention. The Conqueror throws his forces towards Giberois, full with vengeance. To William, this was now just another rebellion needing to be crushed. He is indifferent to the fact that this is his son. He sends a message to the French king, Philippe. This is personal. Stay out of my way. A bribe also helped Philippe make up his mind, so the French pull out of the war. William's first move was to fortify all castles strategic to Giberois. And then, towards late 1078, after spending the Christmas at Rouen with Matilda, sort of maybe early 1079, he focuses his military campaign on laying siege to his son's forces at the chateau. For 3 whole weeks, trebuchets rained down upon the fortress. For 3 whole weeks, the Conqueror assaulted the walls. For 3 whole weeks, the defenders ran low on food and morale, knowing the French were not coming to their aid. There was only one last tactic for Robert, and that was to sally forth out of the castle and meet his father in battle sword in hand. And this he did. From her palace in Rouen, Matilda could only wait nervously for news that she never wanted to hear. For 3 members of her family were at the chateau. Robert, William, and her second son Rufus. They were all there. So she awaited the news. It could be good news of peace. It could also be her worst fear. News that can inform her of the deaths of her sons, her husband, or all.